The rope was already around Oliver Carver's neck when the mountain itself seemed to answer him. He stood on the raised platform in the market square of Anvilrest, wrists bound behind him, the wooden planks cold and damp beneath his boots from the morning frost that clung to every stone of the monastery market at the head of Scarrow Pass. Magistrate Halbrook was reading the sentence in a flat, bored voice, as if treason were no more interesting to him than a tally of grain sacks. The crowd pressed close on all sides, breath fogging in the thin mountain air. Faces he had known his whole life now turned to stone against him. Oliver Carver, Halbrook intoned, having been found guilty of treason against the market town of Anvilrest, of conspiring with raiders to guide them through the secret ways of Scarrow Pass, and of the deaths of 4 caravan guards that resulted therefrom, you are sentenced to hang by the neck until— I did not do this. Oliver's voice cracked out clear and hard, cutting through the magistrate's droning. I have walked this pass since I was 12 years old. I know every hollow and every stone in it. I would never sell it to raiders. The letter bore your mark, Halbrook said without looking up, found on the body of the man who led them. Then someone forged my mark because I did not write it. A murmur went through the crowd, not sympathy, only the low, hungry sound of people who wanted the thing over with so they could return to their stalls and their fires. Abbot Corwin stood at the edge of the platform in his gray monastery robes, hands folded, his face carved with something that might have been doubt, but he said nothing. The monastery was meant to be neutral ground. Neutral did not mean brave. Halbrook lifted the rope himself, and that was when the horns sounded from the eastern gate of the market wall, not the short bleeding horns of the town watch, deep ones. War horns, curved from ox horn and banded in iron, the sound rolling down off the black shoulders of the mountains like something from an older, harder age. The crowd turned as one, and through the gate came riders on shaggy mountain-bred mounts, and at their head, cutting through the frightened townsfolk like a blade through cloth, rode Vola Doomhammer. Oliver had seen orc traders in the market before, had traded nods with a few of the scouts along the pass, but he had never seen her this close, and the sight of her stole the breath he had left. She rode bareheaded, black hair braided close to her skull and threaded through with beads of bone and dark bronze, her green-gray skin catching the pale morning light like weathered stone. She wore fitted warrior's leathers, dark and oiled, lace tied up a torso corded with lean muscle, a breastplate of hammered bronze shaped to her form rather than hiding it, vambraces on her forearms etched with clan markings. A great war hammer, its head scarred from old battles, rode strapped across her back, and her amber eyes, when they found the platform, found Oliver first. "Hold," she said, and her voice did not need to shout to carry across the square. "Hold that rope, magistrate, before I decide your neck is a fair trade for his." Halbrook's face went the color of old milk. "Chieftess Doomhammer, this is a human matter, tried under human law, on ground that belongs to no one," Vola said, swinging down from her mount in a single fluid motion that made the leather of her leggings creak. "Anvilrest sits at the head of Scarrow Pass by the grace of the accord my grandmother's grandmother signed in blood 20 years after the long war ended, so that neither our people nor yours would drown this valley in corpses again. I have read that accord more times than you have breathed, magistrate. I know its clauses better than the monks who keep the parchment." Abbot Corwin stepped forward at last, alarmed. "Chieftess, the toll right has not been invoked in 11 years, Vola said. "I know, I invoke it now." She turned and her eyes swept the crowd once, slow and deliberate, daring any man there to challenge her. "By the old clause of the Scarrow Accord, any chieftain of the clans may claim one soul condemned to death as toll right, and take that soul as prisoner of the clan rather than see it hanged. This was written so that human vengeance would never again outrun human justice. I claim this man." She pointed, and her finger, tipped in a short curved nail, was aimed directly at Oliver's chest. "I claim Oliver Carver." The square erupted. Voices rose on every side, some outraged, some frightened. A few, the ones who had liked Oliver, who remembered him pulling children out of the river in spring floods, who remembered him walking 3 days through snow to warn a homestead of a coming raid, voices that sounded almost relieved. Halbrook sputtered, gestured, called for guards who did not move because 20 orc riders sat their horses at the gate with spears loose in their hands and no fear at all in their bearing. "He is condemned for treason," Halbrook finally managed. "Aiding your own people against ours. You would claim a spy." "I would claim what is mine to claim," Vola said, and there was iron under the words. "The accord does not require me to explain myself to you, magistrate. It requires only that I speak the claim before witnesses, and that a monk of Anvilrest record it." She looked to Corwin. "Record it, abbot, or tell me the accord your order swore to keep is worth less than the parchment it is written on." Corwin's throat worked once. Then he turned to the scribe at his side. "Record it," he said quietly. "The claim is lawful." They cut the rope from Oliver's neck with a single stroke of a curved knife, and rough hands, not cruel, but not gentle either, hauled him down from the platform toward the waiting horses. He stumbled once on the steps, and it was Vola herself who caught his arm, her grip like a manacle of warm iron, steadying him without looking at him, as though catching condemned men were an ordinary morning's work. "Don't fall," she said low, for him alone. "I did not come all this way to watch you break your neck for free after I paid to save it." He looked up into her face for the first time from close enough to see the fine scar through one eyebrow, the amber of her eyes flecked with something almost gold, and for one strange, suspended moment the fear and the fury of the morning fell away, and all he could think absurdly was that he had never in his life seen anyone so magnificent. "I didn't ask to be saved," he said, because his mouth apparently worked faster than his sense. Something flickered at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile. "No," she agreed. "You asked to hang. From what I heard, I decided you were wrong." Then she was pulling him up onto the horse behind her, binding his wrists again, more loosely this time, he noted, loose enough to work free if he were patient and clever, though he did not say so, and the war horn sounded again. And Anvilrest fell away behind them as they rode for the high passes, and Oliver Carver, scout of the border, keeper of every trail through Scarrow, rode into the mountains as the prisoner of an Orc Chieftess he had never spoken a word to before that morning. They made camp that first night in a hollow below the tree line, where a stream cut black and cold through granite, and the fires were kept low so the light would not carry down the mountain to any watching eyes. Oliver sat with his back against a boulder, wrists now bound with a length of rope in front of him rather than behind, watching the orc warband move around him with the easy competence of people who had done this 1,000 times. No one spoke to him. No one looked at him, except for one broad-shouldered warrior with a scarred jaw who spat pointedly in the dirt near his boots and muttered something in the orcish tongue that did not need translating to understand its meaning. Vola crossed the camp and sat on a fallen log across the fire from him without asking permission, which he supposed made sense, since she was the one who owned the fire, the camp, and now, apparently, him. "You're not eating," she observed, nodding at the bowl of stew someone had set at his feet and that he had not touched. "Forgive me if I'm not hungry. I was meant to be dead by breakfast." "You should eat anyway. A prisoner who starves himself out of spite is no use to anyone, least of all himself." She picked up a second bowl and ate with unhurried grace, watching him over the rim of it. "Besides, spite is a poor reason to die. If you want to die, do it for something better." "Is that orc wisdom?" "That is Vola wisdom," she said. "Eat Oliver Carver." He noted with some surprise that she knew his full name, had known it before she rode into the square before the horn sounded. That was not the kind of thing a chieftain learned by accident. "You knew who I was," he said slowly, "before today. I make it my business to know the men who walk Scarrow Pass better than I do." She set her bowl down. "There are perhaps 3 humans alive who know the old goat trail through the sister's teeth without a guide. You are one of them. I did not intend to watch the other 2 hang the fool away for a crime he did not commit." His head came up sharply. "You believe I'm innocent." "I know you are innocent," she said, and there was no softness in the way she said it, only a flat, considering certainty, the tone of a woman stating the weather. I have had my own scouts watching that pass for 2 months, Oliver Carver, because someone has been feeding the Grey Talon Raiders knowledge of it that my people did not give, and that, until 3 days ago, I assumed you had sold. Then my scouts found the man who actually did the selling, meeting with a Grey Talon rider not 4 leagues from Anvilrest's walls, 2 nights before your trial began. She let that settle. It was not you in that meeting. I know your face well enough by now to be certain. The stew in front of him suddenly did not matter at all. Then why, he said, low and furious, did you let them nearly hang me anyway? Why not simply say so at the trial to the magistrate? Because your magistrate would sooner hang an innocent human than admit an Orc Chieftess had solved his crime for him, Vola said, without heat, as if this were simply another fact of weather. And because if I named the true traitor before I knew what he was protecting, he would vanish into the passes before I could catch him, and the raids on my own people's caravans would continue. I needed you alive, Oliver Carver, and I needed the real spy to believe he was still safe. Claiming you as Tollwright solved both problems at once. He stared at her for a long moment, the fire popping between them, throwing gold light up the strong planes of her face. So I'm not a prisoner, he said slowly. I'm bait. You are both, she said, and this time the corner of her mouth did curl unmistakably into something wicked. Does that trouble you? It should, but it doesn't. No, he admitted, and found to his own irritation that he was almost smiling back at her. No, it doesn't. She studied him a moment longer, something assessing in the amber of her eyes, and then rose, brushing dirt from her leggings. Eat your stew, Scout. Tomorrow we climb the Sister's Teeth, and I want your legs under you, not shaking from hunger. You're taking me up the goat trail. I am taking you, she said, already walking away, wherever I please. You belong to me now, Oliver Carver. Try to remember that. He watched her go, the easy, dangerous grace of her, the warhammer strapped across her back catching the last of the firelight, and he picked up the bowl of stew and ate every bite of it. Because whatever else was true, the woman was not wrong about his legs. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that startled Oliver with how quickly it stopped feeling like captivity and started feeling like something else he did not yet have a name for. He worked. That was the plain truth of it. A prisoner who could read the mountain like a second language was too valuable to keep idle, and within a week Vola had him walking at the head of her scouting parties, pointing out the places where a trail folded in on itself, the hollows where snow gathered treacherous and deep, the game paths that would carry a raiding band undetected past a sentry post if no one thought to watch them. The scar-jawed warrior, whose name Oliver eventually learned was Bracca, made no secret of his contempt, muttering about chieftains who kept human pets and forgot the old wars, until the day Oliver's warning about a rotted snow shelf saved 4 of Bracca's riders from being buried alive under a slide that thundered down not 20 heartbeats after they cleared it. Bracca did not thank him, but he stopped spitting near his boots, which Oliver decided to count as progress. Vola herself he saw every evening at the fire, in conversations that started as interrogation and became something closer to argument, and then something closer still to the easy back-and-forth of 2 people who enjoyed testing each other's edges. You walked that trail like it insulted your mother, she told him one night, watching him massage a cramp from his calf. Slower. The mountain does not reward men who fight it. Some of us didn't grow up climbing rock faces for sport, Chieftess. No, she agreed. Some of you grew up soft in valleys with roofs over your heads and no wolves at your door. I had wolves plenty, Oliver said, 2-legged ones mostly. Try growing up an orphaned scout's apprentice in a border town sometime and tell me how soft that is. Something shifted in her face at that, a flicker of interest she did not quite hide. Orphaned. My parents died when I was 9. Fever, the winter it came through the valley. The old ranger, Tobias, took me in because I was the only child in town small enough to fit through the smuggler's gap in the old watchtower wall to fetch back a strayed goat, and he needed someone who could go where he couldn't anymore, on account of his knees. Oliver shrugged, an old ache gone comfortable with age. I've walked this pass alone more nights than I've slept under a real roof since he passed. So don't tell me I'm soft, Chieftess. I might not swing a warhammer, but I know what it is to survive on nothing but what the mountain gives you. Vola was quiet for a moment, the fire snapping between them, and when she spoke again her voice had lost its needling edge. I did not know that. No reason you should have. No, she looked at him, really looked, in a way that made his skin feel too warm despite the mountain cold. I find that I want to know more regardless. He did not have an answer for that, not one that wouldn't have given away far more than he was ready to admit even to himself. So he said nothing, and she did not push, and they sat together in a silence that felt, for the first time, less like a captor and her prisoner and more like two people who had simply run out of reasons to keep their distance. It was 3 weeks into his captivity, if that was still the honest word for it, that the gray talons struck the caravan. Oliver heard it before he saw it, the distant crack of a rifle shot echoing off stone, wrong and out of place, because the gray talons were bandits, not soldiers, and should not have had firearms that far up the pass at all. He was up and moving before Vola gave the order, scrambling toward the ridge that overlooked the lower switchback where a trade caravan human traders, bound for Anvil Rest under an orc escort as part of the fragile new peace, had been ambushed. Down there, he said, pointing. They've hit the wagons at the narrows where the trail pinches. There's no room to turn the mules, they're trapped. Vola was already moving, warhammer coming off her back with a hiss of leather, shouting orders in the orcish tongue that sent her warriors flowing down the slope like water, finding the fastest course downhill. Oliver ran with them, unarmed, bound loosely enough now that the rope was more habit than restraint, and when Braca shoved a short hunting knife into his hand without a word, he understood it for what it was. Not trust, exactly, but the closest thing to it that a proud old warrior could manage on short notice. The fight at the Narrows was brutal and fast, orc warriors crashing into raiders who had expected easy plunder, and found instead a war party descending on them from the high ground. Oliver kept to the edges, hauling a wounded human trader out from under a collapsed wagon wheel, dragging him clear of the fighting, and it was there in the chaos that he saw the rifle-bearing raider take aim not at a warrior, but at Vola's back as she fought 2 men at once, her attention fully consumed. He did not think. He threw the knife. It was not a killing throw, not from that distance, not with his aim, but it struck the raider's shoulder hard enough to spoil the shot, and the ball meant for Vola's spine cracked instead into stone a foot wide of her. She spun, saw the raider recoiling, saw Oliver standing exposed and weaponless 20 feet away, having just given away his own knife, and something crossed her face that he would turn over in his memory for a long time afterward. Not the fierce battle joy she wore fighting the others, but something closer to fear. She closed the distance in 3 strides and put her warhammer through the raider before he could recover, then rounded on Oliver, grabbing his shoulders in both hands. Are you hurt? Number, I'm Vola, I'm fine. You threw away your only weapon to save me, she said, and it was not a question. You could have run, you could have hidden. You threw a knife at a man with a rifle to buy me 1 heartbeat. It worked, didn't it? That is not the point. Her grip on his shoulders tightened, and up close, with the fight still roaring around them and blood on her knuckles, she looked less like a chieftain and more like a woman who had just watched something she valued nearly slip away from her. You are my prisoner. You owe me nothing. You could have let that shot land and been free within the week, once my clan turned on itself arguing over who should lead in my place. I don't want to be free of you, Oliver said, and the words came out of him before he had decided to say them, raw and unguarded in a way that frightened him more than the rifle had. I haven't wanted that since the first night, if I'm honest, and I'm too tired and too shaken to keep pretending otherwise. For a long moment Vola only looked at him, the noise of the retreating raiders and the cries of the wounded traitors fading into something distant and unimportant. Then she closed the last of the distance between them and kissed him, hard and sudden and fierce, her hands sliding from his shoulders to fist in the front of his shirt, as though she meant to make certain he could not pull away even if some part of him wanted to. He did not want to. He kissed her back with all the pent-up want of 3 weeks spent telling himself this was impossible, one hand coming up to cup her jaw, feeling the smooth strength of her skin under his fingers, and when they finally broke apart they were both breathing hard for reasons that had nothing to do with the fight. That, Vola said, a little unsteadily, was not sanctioned by the accord. Neither was throwing a knife at a rifleman, Oliver said. I think we're both making up new rules as we go. Apparently so. She did not let go of his shirt. I am not sorry. Neither am I. Around them her warriors were already binding the surviving raiders and tending the wounded traitors, and Braca, some distance off, was very deliberately not looking in their direction, though the set of his shoulders suggested he had seen everything and was already deciding what he thought about it. They found the answer to the true traitor's identity 2 days later in the pocket of one of the captured raiders, a folded letter, sealed with a wax stamp Oliver recognized instantly, because he had seen it 100 times on trade manifests passing through the Anvil Rest market house. Aldous Fenn, he said grimly, turning the letter over in his hands. Chief trade broker of Anvil Rest. He handles half the caravan contracts in the valley. Vola took the letter, scanning the Orcish and common script scrawled across it, payment terms, dates, the location of a caravan route Fenn had no legitimate reason to know. He sells your traders routes to the Grey Talons, lets them take a cut of the plunder, and keeps his own hands clean while the raids drive frightened merchants to pay him for safer contracts instead. It is an old kind of greed. I have seen its shape before, only never so patient. And when I found evidence of the route leaks myself 3 months back and started asking questions at the trade house, he needed a scapegoat who already knew the secret ways well enough to be believable, Vola finished, and who had no family, no lord, no one who would fight very hard for him. Her jaw tightened. He miscalculated. He didn't count on you, Oliver said quietly. No, she agreed, and there was something fierce and possessive in the look she gave him. He did not. The trouble was that knowing was not the same as proving, not to a magistrate who had already nearly hanged one innocent man on forged evidence, and not while Fenn remained comfortably ensconced behind the walls of Anvil Rest, protected by his position and his coin. It was Abbot Corwin, reached through a careful, secret message carried by one of Vola's scouts disguised as a trader, who provided the opening. The accord required a formal renewal ceremony each year at the first frost, a gathering of both peoples at the monastery market to reaffirm the old peace, and this year's renewal was only 10 days away. It would also, by long custom, be the occasion at which any toll right claim older than a season must be formally settled. Either the claimed prisoner released back to human justice, or bound permanently into the claiming clan through the old rite of unbroken claim, a ceremony that in living memory no chieftain had ever bothered to perform, because no chieftain had ever wanted to keep a human prisoner for love rather than convenience. They will expect you to hand me back, Oliver said, turning the implications over as they sat together the night the message arrived, close enough now that his shoulder rested against hers without either of them remarking on it. Fenn most of all. If I'm handed back to Anvil Rest justice, the sentence never went away, Vola. It was only suspended. They'll finish what they started. They will not, Vola said, and there was no doubt in her voice at all, only the flat certainty of a woman already 3 steps ahead. I did not carry you off that platform to walk you back onto it. Then what do? We go to the renewal, she said. We bring proof. And if Fenn or that rival dog Crag Ironhide think to use the ceremony to strip you from me and hand you to the rope after all, her eyes glinted, gold and dangerous in the firelight, then they will learn that I did not become chieftess of my clan by losing arguments I care about winning. Oliver felt something in his chest that was equal parts terror and something warmer, fiercer, that he was beginning to understand he would never again be able to call anything but love. "Vola," he said. "If it comes to a fight in front of the whole valley, then it comes to a fight," she said simply. "I have fought for less than you, Oliver Carver. I will not pretend otherwise now." The renewal ceremony was held, as it had been for 20 years, in the wide stone courtyard of Anvilrest Monastery, where the mountain wind cut sharp and cold across banners bearing both the sigil of the human market town and the crossed hammer sigil of the allied clans. The courtyard was packed on both sides, humans crowded along the eastern wall, Orc clanfolk along the western, Abbot Corwin and his brother monks arrayed at the center beside a long table bearing the ancient parchment of the accord itself, its ink faded but its seals still whole. Magistrate Halbrook stood near the parchment, flanked by 2 of his guards, and beside him, smiling with the easy comfort of a man who believed himself untouchable, stood Aldous Fenn, plump and well-dressed in a fur-trimmed coat that had certainly not been purchased on a broker's honest wages. On the western side, among the assembled clan elders, stood a broad, heavily scarred Orc Oliver had not met before but recognized instantly from Vola's description. Crag Ironhide, chieftain of the neighboring Ironhide clan, a rival who had coveted Vola's territory and her clan standing for years, and who had made no secret, through whispered channels, of his disapproval of a chieftess who kept a human pet, instead of ruling with a proper warrior's contempt for the border folk. Oliver stood at Vola's side as they approached the central table, wrists finally, entirely unbound, which felt like its own small victory. He wore borrowed clan leathers over his own worn scout's clothes, and if he looked out of place standing beside the towering, magnificent figure of the chieftess, no one in that courtyard was foolish enough to say so aloud. Abbot Corwin cleared his throat, unrolling the parchment with the careful reverence of long habit. By the terms of the Scarrow Accord, renewed this day, all matters of toll right claimed and unresolved must be settled before the treaty may proceed. Chieftess Vola Doomhammer claimed the condemned man Oliver Carver 11 months past this season, under the ancient clause. The claim has run its full year. It must now be resolved. Release or unbroken claim. Release, Halbrook said immediately before Vola could speak. The man's sentence was never overturned, merely delayed. Justice must be served. Justice, Vola said, her voice cutting clean across the courtyard, was never served in the first place, magistrate, because the man was never guilty. Fenn's smile did not waver, but something tightened at the corner of his eyes. A convenient claim, chieftess, made by a woman who has clearly grown fond of her prisoner. Forgive us for doubting the impartiality of the source. Then doubt this instead, Oliver said, and stepped forward before Vola could answer for him, pulling the folded, wax-sealed letter from inside his borrowed leathers and holding it high enough for the whole courtyard to see. This letter was found on a gray Talon raider captured 3 weeks ago at the ambush of the Anvilrest trade caravan. It bears your seal, Master Fenn. It names the caravan route, the date, and the payment you were owed for selling that knowledge to raiders who murdered 4 guards on the strength of it. The courtyard went very still. That is a forgery, Fenn said, too quickly, his composure cracking at the edges. The same sort of forgery that condemned this man in the first place, no doubt planted by the orcs to, "The seal is yours," Abbot Corwin said quietly, taking the letter from Oliver's hand and turning it over. "I have witnessed your correspondence with this monastery for 6 years, Master Fenn. I know this wax stamp as well as I know my own." "Bring the raider," Vola said, "the one who carried it. He waits under guard at the eastern gate, and he is eager, I think, to trade his own neck's safety for the truth about who paid him." Halbrook's face had gone the color of ash. "Fenn, is this? This is nothing," Fenn snapped, and the mask finally fell away entirely, ugly and desperate underneath. "This is an orc's word and a bandit's lie, dressed up to save her human pet from the rope he earned." "He earned nothing," Oliver said, and his voice rang out over the courtyard louder and steadier than he had known himself capable of. refusing at last, after months of silence and captivity and careful survival, to stay quiet one moment longer. I have walked Scarrow Pass since I was a boy. I have carried warnings through blizzards to homesteads that would have died without them. I have bled for this valley more times than I can count, and I was ready to hang for a crime that man committed so that no one would look too closely at his own ledgers. I will not stand here silent and let him send me to that rope a second time while pretending it is justice. Guards, seize him, Halbrook barked, but his own men hesitated, glancing uncertainly between the magistrate and the letter now being read aloud by Corwin's scribe to the gathered crowd, and in that instant of hesitation, Fenn broke. He shoved past his own guards and bolted for the eastern gate, and the courtyard erupted into shouting chaos, humans surging one way, orc warriors surging another, Crag Ironhide's voice booming out something in the orcish tongue that sounded very much like an accusation aimed at Vola's honor, and two of his warriors stepped forward with spears leveled, as though the disorder were the excuse they had been waiting for all along. Vola moved like a storm given shape. She caught Fenn by the back of his fur collar before he had gone 10 steps, hauling him bodily off his feet and slamming him down onto the flagstones hard enough to knock the wind from him, her boot planted on his chest before he could even think of rising. In the same breath she rounded on Crag Ironhide's advancing warriors, Warhammer already free of its strap, and the sheer fury blazing off her stopped them cold. "You would use this moment to spill blood on treaty ground," she said, and her voice had dropped to something low and lethal that carried further than any shout could have. "Over a human who has done more for this valley in a season than your clan has done for peace in a decade, Crag. Say the word. Raise that spear 1 inch higher. I will settle our old quarrel here in front of both our peoples, and we will see whose claim to leadership survives it." Crag's warriors did not raise their spears higher. After a long, taut moment, they lowered them entirely, and Crag himself, scowling, made a short, sharp gesture that stood down the rest of his kin. "This is not settled, Doomhammer," he growled. "No," Vola agreed. "But it is settled enough for today." She looked down at Fenn, still pinned beneath her boot, wheezing. "Take him," she said to Halbrook's guards, who this time moved without hesitation. "And magistrate, I trust the sentence against Oliver Carver is, at last, formally overturned." Halbrook, staring at the letter in Corwin's hands, at the captured raider now being dragged forward by 2 orc scouts to corroborate every word of it, at the ruin of Fenn's composure on the ground before him, gave a single, shaken nod. "The sentence is overturned. Formally. Fully. Oliver Carver is," he swallowed, "innocent. And free." A ragged cheer went up from the human side of the courtyard. Familiar faces Oliver had grown up beside finally daring to look at him without fear or doubt clouding their eyes. But it was the orc side of the courtyard that fell into a different kind of hush, because everyone there understood what came next, understood it in the sudden way a held breath understands the coming release. Vola turned from Fenn's crumpled form to face Oliver, and the courtyard, sensing the shift, went quiet enough to hear the wind moving through the monastery banners overhead. "The claim has run its year," Abbot Corwin said carefully into that silence. "As is written, Chieftess. He is free to be released, his debt paid, his life his own once more." "I know what is written," Vola said. She did not look away from Oliver. "I also know what is not written, Abbot, and that is the right of unbroken claim, which any chieftain may invoke instead of release, if the one claimed consents freely, before witnesses, to remain bound to the clan not as prisoner but as chosen mate." The words dropped into the courtyard like a stone into still water. Oliver felt every eye in that place turn to him, felt his own heart slamming against his ribs harder than it had on the gallows platform months before, and found that this fear, unlike that one, was not fear at all, but something closer to standing at the edge of the highest cliff on Scarrow Pass and finally, after a lifetime of careful footing, choosing to leap. "You would ask me this here," he said softly, "in front of everyone." "I have never been a woman who does things quietly, Oliver Carver," Vola said, and for the first time since he had known her, her voice was not iron at all, but something rawer, something almost uncertain, as though the fiercest warrior in the mountains had never once been more afraid than in this moment of asking. I claimed you off a gallows because I could not bear to watch you die for a crime you never committed. I kept you at my fire because I found I did not want you anywhere else. I am asking you now, before my people and yours, because I do not want you as my prisoner any longer. I want you as mine freely if you will have me. I threw a knife at a rifleman for you, Oliver said, and his voice was thick with feeling he no longer tried to hide. I think we're well past the point of pretending I could ever have wanted anything else, Vola. Yes. God's help me, yes. The sound that went up from the western side of the courtyard was not quite a cheer, orcs being generally too proud for such open sentiment. But it was close enough. A great rolling wave of approving shouts and weapon hilts pounded against shields, and even a few of the human onlookers, caught up in the sheer romance of it despite themselves, added their voices to the noise. Abbot Corwin, looking rather as though he could not quite believe the morning he was having, cleared his throat once more and raised his voice over the celebration. Then let it be recorded by the authority vested in this monastery under the Scarrow Accord, that the toll-right claim of Vola Doomhammer, chieftess of Clan Doomhammer, upon the man Oliver Carver, is converted this day, freely and by mutual consent, into the right of unbroken claim. He is no longer prisoner. He is clan and hers before all witnesses. Vola closed the last of the distance between them and kissed him again, there in front of the whole gathered valley, humans and orcs alike. And this time there was no fight roaring around them to excuse the urgency of it. Only the simple, fierce joy of two people no longer required to pretend they were anything other than exactly what they had become. The unbroken claim, as it turned out, was not merely a declaration but a rite, and it was performed that same evening, once the courtyard had been cleared of magistrates and captured traitors, and the business of ordinary justice, in a smaller and more private ceremony at the edge of the orc encampment beyond the monastery walls, lit by torches and the first hard stars of the mountain night. Vola's clan elders gathered in a loose circle, Braca among them, arms crossed but with an expression that Oliver had learned over months to recognize as the closest thing the scarred warrior possessed to approval. An old clan matriarch, wrapped in furs against the cold, bound Oliver's wrist and Vola's wrist together with a cord woven from mountain goat hair dyed dark with crushed iron ore, the traditional binding of the rite, while she spoke words in the old tongue that Vola later told him, translated roughly to a blessing that their strength be shared and their burdens halved. When the cord was cut free, not removed, but cut, so that each of them wore a length of it knotted about their wrist afterward, a mark any orc or knowledgeable human traveler would recognize on sight as the sign of a claimed and claiming bond, Vola drew him close, beneath the torches, away from the eyes of the gathered clan for one private moment. "There is one more part of the rite," she murmured against his ear, "that is not spoken in front of witnesses." Oh. His pulse was already unsteady from the ceremony, from the firelight catching gold in her eyes, from the sheer improbable wonder of the day. "And what part is that?" "The part," she said, drawing him by the front of his shirt toward the tent that had, for months, been her own alone, and would from this night be theirs, "where I finally have you to myself, without an entire valley watching, and intend to make very thorough use of the privilege." He laughed, low and disbelieving and utterly happy, and let her pull him inside. And what passed between them that night behind the hide walls of her tent was tender where the day had been fierce, unhurried where the months before had been full of danger and stolen moments. Her hand slow and reverent against his skin, his own trembling with the weight of being wanted so completely by someone who could have had her pick of any warrior in the mountains, and had chosen, against every expectation, him. It was warmth and closeness, and the quiet murmured things two people say to each other when the whole world has finally stopped trying to tear them apart, and when it was done, They lay tangled together beneath firs, while the camp settled into sleep around them, and Vola traced the length of the binding cord at his wrist with one careful finger. "I have led this clan for 6 years," she said quietly into the dark. "I have never once in all that time wanted to stay in one place with one person as much as I want to stay here with you tonight." "Good," Oliver murmured against her hair, "because I have absolutely no intention of letting you leave." The following spring found Scarrow Pass busier than it had been in a generation. Caravans moving freely between Anvilrest and the mountain camps now that the Grey Talon raids had ceased with Fenn's arrest and Crag Ironhide's grumbling ambitions had quieted under the combined weight of Vola's authority, and the plain fact that her human mate had become, in his own right, one of the valley's most trusted men. Oliver still walked the trails, still knew every hollow and shelf of stone better than any living soul. But now he walked them as Vola's partner in every sense that mattered, advising her scouts, mediating disputes between orc traders and human merchants who still, some days, needed reminding that the old prejudices served no one, and returning each evening to a tent, and later a proper stone and timber lodge built at the joining point where clan land met human land, that was unmistakably home. Nearly a year to the day after horns had sounded through the market square of Anvilrest, and a chieftess had ridden through a crowd of frightened humans to claim a condemned man off the gallows, Oliver stood on the porch of that lodge in the last golden light of an autumn evening, watching Vola return from the high pastures with a string of traitors under her escort, her warhammer riding easy across her back, her dark hair loose for once and catching the wind, and felt something settle in his chest that he had never known, in all his years of solitary trails and empty homesteads, that a man like him was allowed to feel, entirely, unshakably chosen. She caught sight of him waiting and broke from the column, crossing the last stretch of ground at an easy lope, and when she reached him she did not stop to speak first, only kissed him soundly, uncaring of the traders and warriors filing past with knowing, unsurprised looks, because by now the whole valley understood that this was simply how their chieftess greeted her mate, every single time, as though the parting had been a year rather than an afternoon. "You're smiling," she said, when she finally drew back, studying his face with open, easy affection. "I have a great deal to smile about," Oliver said. "A year ago today I thought I had about 4 minutes left to live." "A year ago today," Vola corrected, looping the binding cord at her wrist briefly around his in an old, familiar gesture that had become their own private ritual. "I decided that 4 minutes were not nearly enough time to waste on hanging the best thing that was ever going to happen to me. I would say it worked out rather well for both of us." "It did," Oliver agreed, and drew her close against him with the mountain wind rising cool around them and the lights of the lodge glowing warm at their backs. "It worked out exactly right." And there, at the head of Scarrow Pass, where an old accord had once been written to keep two peoples from tearing each other apart, and where a chieftess had broken every expectation of her own people, and his to claim a condemned scout as hers instead of letting him die, they stood together as equals, bound not by law or rope or ancient clause any longer, but by the simple, hard-won truth that they had chosen each other, and meant, both of them, to go on choosing each other for as long as the mountain stood.